welcome to another episode of Who Died with Pete and Alex. It's your weekly voyage into some of the famous, infamous, and otherwise noteworthy people who kicked the bucket in the past week. And Pete, I understand we're starting off with the world of sports today.
That's right. It's baseball season, so our first honoree this week might not be a household name to you and I, or to you and me. But
any one of us.
Yeah, might not. You might not know. I might not know. But I do know. It's Manabu Kitabeppu. Apologies if I'm not pronouncing that entirely correctly. But Manabu Kitabeppu was a professional baseball pitcher in Japan. He was the first round pick of the Hiroshima Toyo Carp. In 1975, one of the most famous Japanese right-handed pitchers of all time, let's say. So good, he was named the Precision Machine. That's a pretty good name.
Probably sounds a little cooler in Japanese.
Probably, yeah. Let's see. Seimitsu Kikai.
That sounds pretty tough.
Does that sound right? Because he was such good control. He was a control. There's not to oversimplify it. Often there's a balance between the two, but speed and control are two important factors. And a pitcher who has good control can have a longer career often because they, can work around. They're more of a kind of a strategic pitcher. And he did have a long and storied career. He was a 7 times all-star in the Japanese league, the NBP. 79 through 1980. So 79, 80, 82, 83, 84, 88, 92. So like 70s. He was drafted in 75, kind of by the late 70s hit his groove, and then all throughout the 80s into the kind of, ups and downs, peaks and valleys, strikes and gutters, but kind of kept his career going well for a long time.
Long time.
And played his entire career and beyond with the Hiroshima Carp. Now, the Hiroshima Carp, also, side note into the history of the Hiroshima Carp, because they're not my favorite, despite I do have a hat, but they're not my favorite Japanese baseball team. That is the Tokyo Yakult Swallows, are basically the Mets of Japan, because they're their little brother team in Tokyo, and so that's kind of, I feel for them. But always a great amount of respect for the Hiroshima Carp, because they are also kind of symbolic. The team was founded, I think, 4 years after the bombing of Hiroshima, and have always been kind of symbolic of the kind of reconstruction, rebirth. It is a little bit odd that it's just like, the Americans killed a bunch of us. They bombed and destroyed our city. Let's make a team of their national sport. Let's get really into what they do, which is an interesting, whole different cultural discussion. But the Hiroshima Carp followed, just a couple years after the bombing, and they've been, a going concern ever since. It's interesting. Their name is the Toyo Carp because they, the company that owned them, a lot of the Japanese teams have sponsorship names kind of built in. Like a lot of outside of America, a lot of teams have the name of the sponsor built into the team name. And originally they were named for the Toyo Kogyo company, so they were the Toyo Carp. And then a couple of years later, Toyo Kogo became known as Mazda, and but they kept the team name as the Toyo Carp, because that was, and then they sold Mazda to, to Ford or something like that. But when they sold the company sold out the company, but the family, the Matsuda family, kept their shares in the team, and as such, they're the only one, I think. There's 28. Teams or so, professional teams, and they're the only one that's privately owned. Most are corporate ownership. Not just so it's not just the sponsor. It's not just like some rich guy owns the team and a cheese company wanted to put their name on, paid a lot of money to put their team on the name for a couple of years. It's like the teams are owned by the companies who are they're named after, and so the Hiroshima Toyo Carp, or rarely they're just Hiroshima Carp usually. They're interestingly like an anomaly, almost like the Green Bay Packers are owned by a collective, that same kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. And so that place holds a unique place. That team holds a unique place in Japanese baseball, and also Kitabeppu played he was drafted by them in '75, played his whole career, '76 to '94 for them, went to the broadcast booth, was a kind of analyst, color commentator kind of thing for a couple of years, and then came in as the pitching coach from 2001 to 2004, all for the Carp. Just lived his whole life for the Carp, and I feel like we don't get that as much maybe here because
agreed.
I mean, there could be cultural things that a sense of community is not as important to us. People are more chasing the dollar here, whatever else. But I love seeing a player who's basically career begins and ends with one team, not against their will. I like it when a player kind of is like, oh yes, like this was my team, and they're all in on the team spirit.
Yeah.
And so Kitabeppu, one of the best to ever pitch in Japan, passed away age 65.
65.
65.
Wow, that seems pretty young.
I think it was leukemia, something along those lines. He announced a couple years ago that he had he was having health issues, and so it was yes. I mean, he was just only retired from active baseball in '94, doesn't he? He's
94.
I mean, I guess that could be. But yes, so Kitabeppu, everybody check out some Japanese baseball. They really love it, and it's really fun to watch.
Have some Carp in his honor.
What about you, Alex? Who was your first honoree this week?
I'm going to shine a spotlight on Daniel Ellsberg. Daniel Ellsberg, 7 April 1931 through 16 June 2023. He was a former U.S. Marine and an economist, but he's probably most famous for being, I guess, one of the pioneering document leakers. He was working, he had worked for the Pentagon and the Rand Corporation, and in the late 60s, he started becoming disenchanted with the U.S.'s war policy, and he started becoming something of a anti-Vietnam war activist. And this culminated in 1971 when he and another fellow took some classified documents, what would be called, come to be called the Pentagon Papers, and he shared these to the New York Times. And the Pentagon Papers were basically sort of an internal memo discussing how the Vietnam War was probably not able to win, and that it was basically a catastrophe. And this was meant only for government eyes, not for regular people's eyes. And Ellsberg thought that this was his argument later on would be like classified. This was not classified to protect the people. It was classified to protect the government, which he said is not why things should be classified. Right.
Similar argument in a similar vein made in Chelsea Manning's book that the stuff that was going on, she wanted to kind of shine a light on the things that the people should know.
Yes.
That they're not being told, and it's not classified because it would hurt. It's not a secret because it would affect people's lives. It would affect security. It's just it would be embarrassing.
Yeah, the government trying to cover up its own mistakes and blunders. Yeah. It became a landmark case because the Nixon administration sued the Nixon administration said you can't publish this stuff, and they went to the Supreme Court with it, New York Times versus the United States, and that's when the Supreme Court, in its wisdom, decided that you can't stop a paper from publishing something, even if it's classified. That's not that freedom of the press extends to that far. And of course, that is a battle that is still ongoing today, even though that case was settled. It's still not quite a black and white issue these days. This would also have Ellsberg faced 115 years in prison for espionage and treason, but the judge ruled that the gross government misconduct in the case had decided that he could not be prosecuted, and the case was dismissed. He didn't go to prison. He after that, he continued a life of political activism and supporting other whistleblowers, i.e. Chelsea Manning, Licky Weeks.
Licky Weeks.
All those
favorite.
Things. And but also it would have other unforeseen consequences. Nixon was so angry about these government leaks that he became obsessed with ruining Ellsberg and stopping leaks from coming out of the White House. So he started the elite plumbers unit, which was in charge of these kind of things, and ultimately would wind up in the Watergate scandal. The same plumbers would be involved in Watergate, which of course gave us the gate suffix, which I was surprised to learn even other countries use gate. I was surprised there was a British scandal and they referred to it as gate. So Nixon, your legacy lives on forever with the crime that you do not want to be associated with. And St. Francis School of Law named Ellsberg the fourth most famous whistleblower in American history. So
fourth?
Yes. I believe Deep Throat, Mark Felt was number one, and I did not write down the other ones, but
XYZ affair that was that up there.
Most of them were 20th century people, Karen Silkwood, etc., etc. But so there you go, Daniel Ellsberg. Yes, interesting.
I wonder if the Watergate, because partially your knowledge of this era, this is one of your fortes. This is your area of study. And it's all a blur to me, and so in my head I was like, oh yeah, Pentagon Papers, that's part of that Watergate thing, and then it wasn't really, but it is in a sense, like it's all connected.
It's sort of like the prequel to Watergate.
Yeah, right. It's the Pentagon Papers is the Hobbit to Watergate's Lord of the Rings.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you'd watch the Watergate story, and you'd be like, how did Nixon become so paranoid? Why was he so obsessed with this? And you say that's why we're coming out this prequel. The Pentagon Papers. Actually, if you're curious, the movie The Post, in which Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep play newspaper people, that is all about the publishing of the Pentagon Papers and so on. So in that sense, it's like a prequel to All the President's Men. So people should check that out. And shifting gears a bit, you wanted to talk about a butthole surfer.
It's quite a shift, isn't it? Yes, wanted a tip of the hat to wish farewell to Teresa Taylor, also known as Teresa Nervosa, born November 10th, 1962, and just passed away just a couple of days ago at the age of 60. And she was best known, twofold, I think. A certain level of fame that came to fame, let's say, one of two drummers for the Butthole Surfers, between the kind of like the peak lineup of Butthole Surfers, like 83 to 89. Teresa Nervosa and King Coffee were the two two stand-up drummers doing, and they had this kind of like rolling, almost like the Burundi beat, which was kind of that 80s. Adamant, bow, wow, wow kind of a thing with that. Similar take on that. And she was in the band throughout the 80s, except for a brief leave of absence to do some stuff. And they billed themselves as siblings, King Coffee and Teresa Nervosa. They were not. They were just kind of like, I don't know, for some reason that was just part of the mystique. Butthole Surfers, if you don't know them, are a unique bands, almost you could say experimental. They're just they did what they wanted to do. They had a very hard to define sound of just doing whatever they felt like, and sometimes it was chaotic noise rock, sometimes it was more melodic. Eventually, as it got into the as they got lumped in with the alternative scene, and they signed to a major label, which they got a lot of flack for, but I think it was Paul Coffey who was just like, "Are you kidding me? Like Capitol Record, like the label that the Beatles are on, wanted to sign me, and am I going to say no to that?" Like, but then they were produced by John Paul Jones, I think, from Led Zeppelin, and they were they possibly, not going to say sold out, but they kind of sharpened. They filed down some of those sharp edges in a bit of an appeal to more mainstream audiences, perhaps, as time goes on. But still, enjoyable, listenable albums. They just had less of that edge, perhaps. Right. I think most people, the most famous Butthole Surfer song they know is that Pepper, which was their big hit. But Teresa Nervosa did not play on that. She was not in the band at that point. She did come back for a bit in the 2000s. But in between, after Butthole Surfers, pre-return to the Butthole Surfers, she had a small role in the 1990 film Slacker. She was the woman with the kind of hat and sunglasses who comes up and tries to sell Madonna's pap smear. And in the credits listed as pap smear pusher. If you've seen the movie Slacker, you remember it. If you've seen the movie Slacker on the shelf of the video store or in the DVD bin, you might recognize her because she's on the cover for the most part. The poster and the home media cover art all feature that kind of like her looking kind of wistfully towards the camera. It's an iconic shot. Did not put that together at the time that was her, because I was familiar with the Butthole Surfers. I like them, but I did not ever see them live. I have an essay somewhere that is a half-baked essay about 3 times I was supposed to see the Butthole Surfers and didn't. And over the course of the 90s. And just never got to see them live in their peak prime. Although, actually, by the time I would have seen them, she was already not there. So, also, I think it's already done, but the funding for, there was a Kickstarter. Tom Stern, Alex Winter and Tom Stern made the movie Freaked and did a bunch of other things like the Idiot Box on MTV and stuff like that. They're friends with the Butthole Surfers. They made a short film with them at some point in the 80s. And Tom Stern is making a documentary about the Butthole Surfers, and it was, I believe, fully funded on Kickstarter. I know I supported it. I got my rewards, and I think it's in progress. So keep an eye out for that coming up, because I think she features in that, obviously. But Butthole Surfers, not for everybody, but check them out, and if you like them, I think you will. What? Alex, who's your next person? Oh, I wanted to back up. Teresa, tell just the notable kind of long yet steady death process, not to bring things down, but in November of 2021, she announced that she'd been diagnosed. She had kind of end-stage lung disease, and like, hey, this is it. Like, I'm on my way out. And then about a year later, it was like, yep, death is imminent. And then now, about 6 months to a year after that, actually passed away. But that knowing, it's like, well, this is, I have a limited amount of time, and that kind of like, compare and contrast. There was some, some people kind of find that out and have a few, months, weeks, whatever, but just kind of knowing that, finding out like, yep, you're going to die from this sooner as opposed to later, and then getting a couple of years. I can't figure out if that seems ideal or if that seems like, would I rather it just be quick and sudden, or would I rather like have enough time to be?
Yeah, it's an eternal debate.
Yeah,
I guess until you're there, you don't really know which one is the best, and I guess it's different for every person too. So,
yeah,
yeah.
But anyway, that aspect of her passing kind of struck a note with me. But
Yeah, I didn't realize that I was mostly familiar from the cover of the Slacker, the movie poster or DVD cover or whatever you want to call it. I would say that along with that Swimming Baby from the Nirvana album cover are probably two of the more iconic Gen X visuals. So, because, Slacker for a long time became the kind of all-purpose, pejorative for the Gen X people.
Sure.
So, it's kind of funny that she's probably more famous for that, or at least at one point was more famous for that than the music that she performed. So you can never pick what the thing is going to be that makes you famous, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, one person who did not have that problem was Glenda Jackson. She was a British actress and politician, born May 9th, 1936, lived to June 15th, 2023. She was probably peak of her fame was probably the 70s. That's when she won Best Actress Oscars in 1970 for Women in Love, 1973's A Touch of Class. But then, and she did a lot of Broadway. In 1980, she was on The Muppet Show, so I'm sure that's how many of us first encountered her. In 2018, she became the 17th actress to get the American Triple Crown of Acting. It's not the EGOT, it's the Triple Crown of Acting, which is the Oscar, the Emmy, and the Tony Award.
I think is that not a 3GOT when you're like one away from an EGOT? Right?
Oh, is that the term for it?
I don't know. I could be wrong.
Yeah. I feel like once you get three of them, you should automatically be like included in a project. Although you have to win it, right? You have to win the award. It's not like if you're in a movie and the movie wins the award, that doesn't count for you personally.
Right.
So, yeah, that's a tougher sell.
So that's if you are in, let's say you're in a band.
Okay.
And I think you are releasing. Let's say you're in it's a very, very refined set of circumstances here. You're in a band, a major label band that you think might be putting out a terrific album.
Okay.
Take the opportunity, look up the people who have the acting Triple Crown, the 3GOT, whatever, and I'd say include one of them as a producer on your next album, just out of the blue. You know what I mean? Just call somebody up. Oh, hey, you've got an Emmy and an Oscar and a Tony.
Oh, I see.
Would you like to co-produce the next Maroon 5 album? And just have them kind of sit around and call them, use them as a consultant, whatever, but include them as a producer credit. I'm sure there are union rules that prevent some of this from happening, but
I like it though. I hope somebody. Although I was gonna say, I hope somebody tries it, but for all we know, someone already has done that. I don't know all the EGOT winners, so we'll have to check if Glenda Jackson was a producer on the T-Rex album. The 70s. In 2016, she returned to acting, playing King Lear at age 80. I think that might be the one that she won one of her last acting awards. Also noteworthy, 1971, she played Queen Elizabeth I in not one but two different unrelated films. And I always like when actors play the same characters in different films. So thanks for that, Glenda. And of course, the outlier in her career was from 1992 to 2015. She was a member of Parliament in the UK. So kind of the gopher route. Although that was act for Fred Grandy. Was he gopher? I believe.
No, I can't remember.
Anyway, Sonny Bono, the guy who played Cooter. Take your pick. Actors who went on to become politicians. And then she returned to acting. So that's kind of more unusual.
There you go. Schwarzenegger.
Glenda Jackson, gone but not forgotten. And, another person who will not be forgotten certainly is, I believe, the historical figure you're going to tell us about now.
Yes. We're going to open up the history books and look at, on this date, or this week in history, who passed away. And we're looking back to June 15th, 1996. At the age of 79, we lost one Ella Jane Fitzgerald, First Lady of Song, Queen of Jazz, Lady Ella, and the namesake of my wife. Ella Fitzgerald made her most important. She made her big debut at the age of 17 at one of the very beginning of the amateur night at the Apollo kind of setup. The Apollo Theater was up and running. They were like, well, why don't we have amateur night? People can just come up and do whatever. And she went up there. She was all ready to do a dance performance, but right before her, there's a dance duo went up and just killed it, and she was like, well, now I can't dance. What am I going to do? So instead she sang a song, and the rest is history.
Wow.
Then she kind of performed, made early details of her life are not super forthcoming. You know, she had a kind of a troubled, her mother died from a car accident at some point. In her teens, I think, and she was living with a stepfather, but then went off to live with relatives or in an orphanage, possibly for a little bit. But after that successful debut, kind of managed to make a living as a kind of a gigging singer for a little bit. Then up into 1935, was introduced to band leader, drummer, I believe, Chick Webb, who was looking for a singer. And at first was just like, took a look at her and was just like, I don't know, like she was kind of, raggedy looking and didn't look like the prototypical singer. But then just knocked out the performance, became the singer for the band, and took the world by storm in a sense. The became so entrenched with the band that after Chick Webb died a couple years later, about 4 or 5 years later, they just renamed the band Ella Fitzgerald and her famous orchestra, and she went and took over. Recorded a ton of stuff with a lot of different famous artists. One of the kind of landmarks was her songbook series. She did the kind of American songbook, which not only is it good music, not only is it good fun to listen to, but it also, there's in the New York Times, Frank Rich was writing about how it's kind of said it's a cultural transaction as extraordinary as Elvis's contemporaneous integration of white and African American soul. So it's kind of the flip of Elvis taking black music and making it popular with a white audience. He says, here is a black woman popularizing urban songs written by immigrant Jews to a national audience of predominantly white Christians. And so it's another reinterpretation of, watering things down and making it palatable for the populace at large, quote unquote. And that series was so successful and wildly, both artistically kind of well recognized and also popular, which is hard to do, and she continued performing, I think, well into her 70s. It was only in the 90s, when her health started failing, she had issues with diabetes and a couple of other things that she did her last performance, I think, in the early 90s at some point. One of her regrets over the course of her career, she never got a chance to do an album, live or studio, with Frank Sinatra. They were friends. They got along really, really well. They appreciated each other's work. Every once in a while they would end up on stage together. They would do things. They never did like a full-on recorded concert together, but they would pop up as, guest performers or whatever else, television specials. They loved working together, and they're like, one of these days we got to do an album, and it just never came together. Apparently complex contractual reasons prevented that from happening, which goes to show you that business ruins everything. Did 14 Grammy Awards, National Medal of the Arts, NAACP's inaugural President's Award. She also did a lot of work for civil rights, like using her platform in a way that, performing in places that would normally be segregated ballrooms and whatever else, and saying they can't be. You know what I mean? If I'm going to play here, it's going to be, anybody can sit wherever they want, basically. Eventually the Presidential Medal of Freedom. That's how much she was appreciated. That's a high-ranking set of awards for Ella Fitzgerald. long, storied, important career. And kind of, one of those, people that I think at the time, so 96, I was in my 20s and didn't quite appreciate the her output until later. There's a lot of there's an old adage that it's just like, you get. Thankfully, it's less so now. I feel like there were two things. Like as you get older, you get you start to get more into jazz, and you start to get more conservative. And I feel like those are less stringent, less kind of set in stone than they once were. And I always kind of fought that urge to.
No one gets into jazz
both.
anymore.
Luckily, yeah. Well, it's I've dabbled in jazz over time, but I wouldn't say I haven't gotten wholeheartedly into it. But I worked with a guy who was always on Saturdays on I think was it on WBGO, or was it on one of the New York radio stations? Would always play Sinatra Saturdays, and they would play a lot of American popular standards. I know it wasn't BGO because it was the whatever station it was. It turned into a Disney station a couple of years, some point in the 90s. They were just like flip of the switch, and instead of it was American popular standards, exactly what what Ella's songbook series was, and they played a lot of her on that station. And then one day they were just like, "Oh, sorry, like lost our lease," basically. And then like the next week it was a Disney radio hits station, and it was unlistenable for somebody in their 20s like me who thought they were cool. But yeah, exposed to her a lot from that radio station and from just kind of musical exploration, and also then meeting my wife who always has a soft spot in her heart for the woman she was named after. So.
I also have a personal connection. My wife and I, when we got married, we walked down the aisle to her and to Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong's "Our Love Is Here to Stay." So we always have a fondness for Ms. Fitzgerald.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that blast from the past. We should all go listen to some Fitzgerald today in her honor. And
make yourself a playlist mix of Ella Fitzgerald and Butthole Surfers, and see if you don't get whiplash. But it's what I'm going to do.
I can't wait till AI is far enough along where we can actually mix them together and do a Butthole Fitzgerald. So, all right. Well, I guess that will wrap up this week of honorees. Good luck, you all, across the Rainbow Bridge. If there's someone we did not mention, or if you want to call someone to our attention, you can find us on Twitter at Who Died Pete and Alex, and we're also on the Instagram as well.
I want to clarify, don't use that as corrections. Don't be like, I can't believe you forgot this person, but you can add your name to the mix. Be like, hey, I also, hey, this person also died, wanted to shine a light on them. Don't yell at us for forgetting. Like we said, there's so many people die every week. We can't cover everybody, and there's some people that are just culturally don't register for us that we might not know about. So if you want to share somebody that you that passed away this week that you was important to you, please feel free in the comments below on YouTube or hit us up on social media. But don't yell at us and say, I can't believe you forgot this person, because it's
yes. And then when you are done not yelling at us, you can see us next week on another Who Died.
Who Died?